This presentation is to provide the audience with information about a certain form of motorsports called sprint car racing. As a child, I grew up with going to the racetrack with my dad. In Arizona, we had a few different dirt tracks we were able to go to. At the age of 6, we would go there every year. The one lasting memory I always have with going to the racetrack is when you pull up and you park, that second you get out of the vehicle, there's this smell that lingers in the air. That smell is methanol. And if you haven't smelled methanol before, it is intoxicating. When you go into a race or to watch a race, the one thing you always notice, especially a dirt track, is the dust. The one thing I always remember as well is my parents drinking adult beverages, and if we sat in the corner or in a turn, watching the dirt clods fall into their adult beverages. That was always a good time. But I would do that every year around the same time with my dad, because there was always a big race that came in town. Him and a couple of uncles, we would go there and watch the races, and it was the greatest because these cars are just on edge constantly. And that's what started my passion for this sport. Fast forward to about 2016, 2015. I had the opportunity with my dad to own our own sprint car. So we decided, because I've always wanted to race since I was a kid, and it only took until, I was 30 years old to understand that we could finally do it, just because of circumstances. So my dad and I, we went and bought a sprint car. The difference is instead of how, as a kid, we would go watch dirt racing, in the state of Idaho, we don't really have dirt racing, so the next closest thing you have is pavement sprint car racing. So we were able to buy our own sprint car, which I'll insert a clip here of the car. And what we ended up doing is we ended up going and racing at our local short track in Meridian, Idaho. We started off with what they call a non-wing sprint car. And I'll go over later in this the difference between wing sprint car, non-wing sprint car, motors, and all this. So we had a sealed Chevy 350 small block motor. And we've ran that for the last 8-9 years. And we've learned a lot since day one to now. The greatest part is I've shared that experience with my father, just like I have when I was younger as a child. We have several wins now. Come close quite a few times to winning championships. And we've also taken it to another step and moved up to a wing series that's more horsepower, but at the end of the day, it is also more expensive. So I'm going to go over now where sprint car racing actually originated from. So the beginnings of sprint car racing can be traced back to before World War I, when racers hit the dirt at the Flat Horse track on the Indiana State Fairgrounds. The original teardrop-shaped models were more closely related to the Indy cars that would follow the then now modern sprint car, which have more aerodynamics. By the late 1940s, sprint cars would come to occupy a middle tier of racing between Indy and midget cars, and would find a home on half-mile dirt ovals across the country. These sleeker, traditional sprints are still being run today. With a lower top speed and different mechanical setups to reflect their lack of downforce, sprint cars got a major profile boost in 1978 with the creation of the World of Outlaws series, which offers a national promotional structure for what had been a rural and regional form of motorsport. Today, the fastest and most advanced sprint car racers compete in the series called the World of Outlaws. But there are similar organizations around the world, as well as numerous winged and non-winged sprint car series, sanctioned bodies such as the United States Auto Club, or as we like to know as USAC. And I'll insert another clip here to show what those cars looked like back then and what they look like now. So there's been a big evolution in the car from before World War I to what we see now today. So have the chassis. The chassis have, like I said, they started off as an original teardrop shape. Now they are of tubular construction. They have this down tube that runs from the top of the cockpit to the front of the car. And there is different way the cars are structured based on if they are a wing car or they're a non-wing car. Usually your typical winged car is going to have the side rail on the bottom of the car, left hand side, is going to be up because when the wing digs over, it needs more clearance, versus a non-wing usually tends to lean over to the right side of the car a little bit more. But with those evolutions also has increased in motor. The engines back in the day started with a V8, still with the V8 to this day. The only difference is the amount of horsepower the V8s put out now. Like I said, the motor that I have in my sprint car right now currently is a Seal 350 small block, puts out maybe 350 horsepower. With the series they have today running from dirt and pavement, there is what they call the next step up is a 305, which puts out probably 400 or 500 horsepower, but is a good economical motor. And then you start getting into the bigger stuff, such as like a Chevy or Ford or Toyota have created 360 cubic inch motors and 410 cubic inch motors. 410 is the end all be all, just due to the fact that they produce anywhere between 800 to 1100 horsepower. Depending on the series, it may be restricted down to reduce horsepower to make it an even playing field. In our series local around our region, especially when it comes to pavements, they try to make it even for anybody who runs a 360 cubic inch motor to a 410. So they'll restrict the 410 to make it horsepower similar to a 360 motor. The one unique factor of these cars is tires. It is the one noticeable thing outside of the chassis that is very noticeable to these cars, because you have a smaller left front and a ginormous right rear. And what I mean by that is size. So in the left front, we typically run anywhere between an 8-inch wide to a 10-inch wide left front wheel. Right front usually is 10-inch to 12-inch. Left rear is typically 14-inch to 15-inch. And right rear is typically 15-inch to 19-inch, depending on what you're trying to do. So the biggest thing is stagger. Circumference of the tires from the right side to the left side. On a more higher bank track, you're going to need less stagger because you're going to need less turn depending on how that track works. Whereas a flatter track, you're going to need more stagger because you're going to want the car to turn more, and that helps with the stagger. So more right rear air pressure you have, less left rear air pressure you have, the more that car is going to want to turn. So with that being said, that is the uniqueness to these cars. And then you add in the factor of difference between non-wing and wing cars. So that's a big determining factor on that end. And like I've talked about throughout this whole speech, is there is a difference between when you're running in dirt and when you're running in pavement. Dirt is constructed, there's several different ways they construct the dirt, whether that's clay, dirt, but there's a lot of track prep, and usually these races are run really later in the night because they need to keep water in the soil. Versus where a pavement track, I mean, it's pavement, it's asphalt. The only thing that's going to change is dust or wind or rain. So with that being said, there are those two different forms, but there are different series amongst each form. So as I stated earlier, World of Outlaws is the cream of the crop when it comes to sprint cars. That series is a winged sprint car based series. There are several other series underneath it. Actually, one competing with it right now is the High Limit series, which is a winged series, but USAC, or United States Auto Club, is a non-wing and midget series. A midget is a smaller version of a non-wing sprint car. Actually, if you look over my left shoulder, there's racing going on right now, and that is what midget racing is. And I will insert pictures to show what each series looks like, how they kind of figure on that end as I'm going through this. But in our local region, as far as when it comes to pavement, which I am more familiar with, our regional area, we have a Speed Tour series that runs in our local area out of Meridian and throughout some different states. There are series across the nation as well, such as Must See TV series and the Sprint Car Shootout series in Florida. As far as dirt, it is a very popular sport. It is also very well known in several other countries such as Australia, South Africa, Brazil, Canada, New Zealand. The list goes on and on. As far as to summarize my speech, sprint car racing is a high octane, adrenaline inducing pirouette of pure insanity. I mean, when you look at a race car that has over 1,000 horsepower, that as a driver is constantly trying to kill you. But when you wrangle it in and you are top of the board, you're getting wins, winning championships, you are, in my eyes, I believe, cream of the crop. They are very unique cars, none like the others. The form of motorsports is very technical. But there are great drivers and impacts on my life that have come from this sport, such as Tony Stewart, AJ Foyt, and my current favorite driver right now is Kyle Larson. They've all done great things in motorsports. Typically, all these drivers have done great things in open wheel racing, such as IndyCar, sprint cars, non-wings, midgets, even going from pavement to dirt. AJ Foyt, Tony Stewart and Kyle Larson have all raced stock cars, so you just got to give a hand to them. But most impactful was my dad, due to the fact that he's the one who got me into it. We started watching racing from early as 3 years old till we're still watching it to this day. So when it comes to racing, our most memorable lines are, when in doubt, throttle out. And if you're going to send it, it better be checkers or wreckers. I appreciate you enjoying my presentation, my speech, and hopefully you've learned a couple things or are more inquisitive about sprint car racing. And maybe one day you'll get an opportunity to go watch a race. If that's the case, I'll see you at the races.